Everyone. How's it going? Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. How's everyone doing? Happy Tuesday. Hey to those of you in the chat already. So hey to Ashore, hey to Jay, Geet, and Just Hit Play. How's it going? Thanks for joining this August live stream. First of all, can everyone see my screen okay and hear me okay? Am I loud enough before we get into what we're going to be doing? Thanks, Jermaine. Yeah, I hope this is a good session. So the plan is, just while I'm sort of waiting for people to let me know that all is good, the plan is to do some fast and fun simulation scenes in Cinema 4D. So this is going to be a nice beginner-friendly session. Thanks, Jermaine. Thanks for letting me know. It's going to be a nice beginner-friendly session. So if you've never really used Cinema 4D before, or even if you have, or you're kind of on the trial or you're looking at getting better when it comes to working with simulation. So as you know, we've had large updates over the last sort of year and a half to the simulation things. I thought it'd be fun to take the next hour to show you how we can create some really, really great looking stuff, but really, really fast, and how we can leave some things at default and we can just get really creative with it. And that's what I like to do. So that's going to be the idea today. And just to give a little idea of what we're going to be creating, here's some shots that I created. And a lot of this is inspired by some of like my favorite artists. And so we're going to start off with this top left one, which is this inflating keys keyboard. And thanks for everyone letting me know that all sounds good. So this is actually based off of a scene created by an artist called Flavio Carvalho. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm very sorry if I'm not, but he's an incredible artist. Let me just sort of pull this in here so you can see this. I saw this, and this is his Instagram handle. If you are not following him already, I would seriously recommend it because, yeah, his stuff is incredible. So let me just click on him so you can see. Yeah, he creates incredible stuff. If we just sort of like go down, this is the idea. This was the inspiration behind this first design. And yeah, so this is actually taken from this model here is taken from the Substance asset browser. And this is exactly how it comes in. So we download the FBX, and I've thrown this straight into Cinema 4D. I haven't done anything to it yet because it's quite important when it comes to working with simulation. We do have to actually consider a few things before we even get to simulating. And just as a quick reminder, if you have any questions on anything, then I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as much as I can. So feel free to ask your questions. If you can help me out by maybe just adding the word question in capitals, or even just a capital Q at the start, then that helps as I am looking through the chat here on my other screen. Cool, right, so this is the model. Let me just make this a little bit bigger for you all to see. So hopefully everyone can see this nice and clearly. We have the keyboard mesh, which if I just lift this up, is the main sort of base shape of the keyboard. We then have our keys. And then we have just this bottom support here. So I'm actually going to I'm just going to delete that just for the sake of this. We're only going to worry about the main keyboard and the keys. So the idea behind this is we're going to make it look like the keys, or some of the keys, are going to inflate and they're going to float away. And the way that we need to do this is we actually need to fix a couple of things, or we need to edit our model first. So at the moment, we can see we don't actually have a gap for the keys. And so at the moment, our keys and our keyboard base are intersecting. And the trouble is, as we may or may not know, when it comes to simulating, if we have intersections and collisions immediately, it can cause errors and it can cause problems. So we need to solve this before we even start simulating. And the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to just use a nice generator called a ball generator, and it's going to cut the keys out of the shape. So what we need to do is, let me just pull my keyboard mesh out of here, and I'm going to just duplicate my keys so we can see this main null here. It holds all my individual keys in. So let me just duplicate that, and I'm going to right click and connect objects and delete, because we don't need them to be individual keys just for this bit. But I'm going to keep the other ones here because we do actually need those later on. So let me just hide those. And then all we need to do is grab the ball, and then I can take these two and I can drop them in the ball. And so what the ball's done is, the Boolean type is A subtract B. So the order of my objects is really important here. So it's taking object A and it's minusing object B, which is our keys. And now we have that shape. So this is the shape we should have, like in a keyboard in the real world. It has those little gaps that the keys then fit in. And then what we can do the same thing and just go current state object, or we can just right click and go connect objects and delete. And now we have that main shape in here. And let's just delete that. And let's just call this our, let's call it our base. Cool. So the next bit is to bring our keys back. So let's just unhide our keys. And then what we can do is, a little trick for you is, if you select all of them. So at the moment, what I need to do now is, I actually need to make them all a little bit smaller, because again, we still might have some minor intersections. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to scale them all down. But the trouble is, if I select the main keyboard null, the main group, and I scale it down, you'll notice that we're not getting the right kind of transformation. So the way that we can scale everything down as an individual object is by just selecting them all, hit T for transform, or you can come and you can choose your transform tool here. So this is our scale tool. And then in object axis, if you just enable that, we can then scale everything up and down as on a per object basis. So I'm just going to scale it down just slightly. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. And then what I can do is, if I wanted to, I can come into these individual ones and I could maybe just fix them a little bit. Because as we can see, they're just a little bit smaller on the x-axis than they should be. Something a little bit like that. Doesn't need to be perfect for the live stream, but of course, if you're doing this again, then feel free to take a little bit more time in that. Okay, so just quickly, before we go to the next bit, we've had a really good question from Kebulan. So let me just show this on screen for you all. So when the model is combined, how do you separate it? I come from Maya and there's a button that separates meshes. I've failed to find it in Cinema 4D. So what you can do is, if the object is connected, so let's say this object here, you can go to Tools, Convert Polygon Islands to Objects, and it's going to do exactly what you want it to do. It is then, let me just turn that off just so you can see that. So we go to Tools, we go to Convert Polygon Islands to Objects, and then it should separate all of those objects or those separate meshes for you. So hopefully that is the answer that you need. Also, a little quick tip here from Zadie is, if you have this set up, you can use a middle mouse click to select the children object of the null. Cool, thanks for that tip. Cool, so now the next bit, what we need to do is let's just pull all of our keys up just to make sure, again, we don't have any collisions. I'm just going to pull them up slightly. So we can now see that we have our separate keys and we have our base. And then from here, we can connect all of our keys together as well. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go connect objects and delete. So now we just have the keys. Let's just call it keys. And we have our base. So this is how we would want to think about optimizing and adjusting any models or any objects or 3D geometry that we then want to look at maybe simulating. So we don't want connections, we don't want intersections and things like that. But the next thing, so if I go to NB, this is going to give me the subdivisions or like the segments of my geometry. So by default, we're NA, which is Gouraud shading. I think we all say this differently. I'll go with Gouraud shading. And then NB is our shading and lines. And this is really nice when it comes to working with simulation because we can see the topology and the segments that are making up our geometry. And in our case, we don't have very even topology. And so when we talk about even topology, we want to have it made up of even rectangles or even quads. And the reason we want that is because when it comes to simulating and we look at, let's use cloth as an example, when it comes to bendiness and stretchiness, which are two of the biggest settings when it comes to creating cloth sims, it's going to look at the points and it's going to determine your bendiness value and stretchiness values on those points. And it will be the distance that they move and stretch and bend from one another. And so if we don't have even topology, we don't have even distance between our points, and therefore we won't have even simulation occurring. So what we need to do is we actually need to just fix this topology, and we can do this really, really easily with the remesh tool. So another one of our generators, if we just grab our remesh and we're going to drop our keys into our remesh, and automatically it gives us a really nice even topology. And so what we can do is we could increase or decrease the density. So that's how subdivided our geometry is going to be. But for now, I actually think this isn't too bad. So it's low enough resolution that I know my simulation isn't going to take a long time to calculate. So the higher the resolution your mesh is, the slower things can be naturally inside of Cinema 4D. But the thing is, if I go too low with my mesh density, I'll lose the shape of these keys. So I actually think this is going to be absolutely fine. So one more time, we'll go to connect objects and delete. And now we have the remeshed version. And this is sort of what it's looking like. And again, you will want to probably take a little bit more care when you're creating this from scratch. I just wanted to do things like really, really quickly. But again, the mesh density, and then just make sure you kind of, when you're scaling your keys down, you maybe come in and edit these slightly longer ones just to make sure we don't have too much of a gap here. So we can see they're not super even at the moment. Okay, so from here, we can actually start to simulate. Asher was wondering, where did I get the keyboard model from? So I actually got it from Substance Asset Library. That's where I found this model. Okay, so let's start to simulate. So now we're ready to go. We've fixed our topology and we've created a much better model in our case. So let's just go and let's go save incremental. So we've got this saved now. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up a vertex map or a vertex map growth. And there's a few ways that we can do this, but I'm gonna keep it really simple first of all, and we'll just create a really simple vertex map growth with a field. But then maybe if we have some time, we'll create something a little bit more interesting. So what we want to do is we want to set a vertex map on our keys remesh. So let's just rename this just to our keys. We're going to right click. I'm just going to type vertex, and it's going to filter to a vertex map. And if I click that tag, we've now added a vertex map tag to our keys. And as we can see, everything's gone bright red. And what this means is at the moment, everything has a vertex weight value of 0. Then inside of my tag, we can go to use fields. And I'm just going to delete the freeze layer. We don't need that. And I'm just going to add a linear field. So let's come out of here and we can see that we have our linear field here. And I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. Maybe I go to something like 5 centimeters, or we could go 10. Let's go 5. Let's leave it on 5. And then this linear field, as I move this along, you will see that we get a change in these colors. So we get red and we get yellow, and in between our linear field, we get a gradient of red to yellow. And what this represents is vertex weight values from 0 to 100%. And then what we can do is we can take this vertex weight and this change in weight, and we can use it to control where our inflation takes place. So what I can do is I can animate this linear field. So let's just do that nice and quickly. I actually want it the other way around. So the thing is, at the moment, if I pull this all the way to the left, everything's yellow. So everything already has a weight value of 100%. But I actually want the weight value to grow onto the keys. So let me just change the direction of my linear field. And now as I pull it on, we can see that I can animate that change in vertex weight on. So let's do that. So let's go to our linear field and keep it nice and simple. Let's just set a keyframe here while everything has a weight value of 0, so 0%, which is red. Hit this little button here. So this little button here is a keyframe button. If I do that, we then get a keyframe set down here. And then let's maybe just increase our frames to something like 150. Actually, let me just quickly, I think I'm going to be in the way. So let me throw myself up here. Here we go. So yeah, all I did was I set a keyframe here, and we can now see that I've got a little keyframe here. And then let's go at frame 120. And let's pull our linear field all the way over till everything's yellow and set another keyframe. Now we have the most simple vertex map growth ever, but we can use this to create some interesting effects now when it comes to working with simulation. Cool. So now what we need to do is we need to actually set up our simulation. And so what I do need to do is, first of all, on my keys. So my keys are going to be the things that inflate and float away. So they need to have a balloon tag on. So if I just grab a balloon, or if I search for balloon, we can throw that tag on there. Or what you can do is you can actually add a cloth tag. So I do this sometimes just by impulse. I'll create a cloth tag, and then I can just enable balloon later on. But we can just add a balloon tag. And what it is you'll notice it is the normal cloth tag. We just have the balloon option already enabled for us. And so if I press play, what's going to happen is, everything collapses and falls through the floor. And this is for a couple of reasons. The main reason is we still have gravity enabled. And what we want to do is, because we want them to float away, we actually don't want gravity in our project settings. So if I go to Command D, this gives me all of my project settings, and I can go to simulation, or Control D if you're on a Windows. I can go to simulation, come into my scene, and I can disable gravity. And also what I need to do is, because I'm working with quite a small scale model, so I know this is this base is 35 by 1 by 15. So it's quite a small model. So what I will need to do is I'll actually need to reduce my scene scale, so I can tell Cinema 4D, okay, we're not working with the normal default size scaling, we're working with a little bit smaller. So let's just go to 10 centimeters. And this means everything, the simulations and physics and forces will react now based on this scene scale as opposed to the original. Okay, cool. Now, as I press play, we can see nothing happens. Even though we have our cloth tag, we haven't really got anything going on. We've just switched off gravity. So how can we start to play around with our simulation settings and also use that vertex map to create some interesting animation? Well, the first thing we want to do is inside of my balloon tag, I actually want to fix or increase my bendiness and stretchiness. So as I sort of said earlier, when it came to remeshing, the reason we did that is because these cloth settings here, they look at the individual points and they look at the topology. And so what the bendiness does is the points that are nearest to it, it's going to allow a certain amount of bend between those 2 points. And so what that means is the lower the bendiness, the more rigid our cloth or our simulation is going to try and be. Whereas if we increase this number, we will allow for a more of a bend, and so a more cloth-like feel to our simulation. And then stretchiness, what it does is it looks at every other point and it's how far they're going to be allowed to stretch apart from one another. So this is why topology and remeshing is very important. So for now, let's maybe just do something like 5 and 5. And then we have our thickness value, and this is also important. So the thickness is going to be, so let's say 2 of these keys then collide. The distance between them is going to be that thickness value. And so what we may need to do is we may need to just drop that down a little bit because we're working with small models. And then the next bit we want to do is we want to make it look like these keys are inflating and floating away. So we want them to look like they're maybe like little balloons or little bubbles. And so the way that we can do that is we can apply what's called overpressure. And overpressure isn't, when I say it isn't inflating, it is going to inflate, but think of it as it's going to give a burst of air. It's going to try and fill everything with a burst of air at the very beginning or over the expansion time, and then it will fade off over time. So it's not going to continue to kind of apply and inflate air. That's why it's called overpressure. And the advice I can give with overpressure is to animate this on over time. So if we just set a keyframe again on 1, our normal kind of default value, and then let's go to maybe frame 120, and let's do 2 as overpressure. So now what's going to happen is over 120 frames, it's going to look to try and inflate our keys. And so as we come down here, we can see we're getting a little bit of inflation going on. As this happens, we can see it's kind of doing what we want it to do, but not really, because everything is happening at the same time. Maybe I can increase this to 3 just so we can see it a little bit clearer. Let's go to 3. So everything is going to be happening all at the same time. What we wanted to do is we wanted to take our vertex map and we wanted our vertex map to control how this inflates. So let's go to our mix animation. And so what mix animation is going to do, it's going to hold everything still and static based on our vertex map. So as our vertex map weight grows and as it increases from red to yellow or 0 to 100%, as it turns yellow, it's then going to, the vertex map is then going to allow it to be simulated. So now as it grows, as will our simulation. So let's just throw in our vertex map. And now as we play this through, hopefully we can now all see that this simulation or this ballooning is occurring and kicking in as the vertex map does. But at the moment, we actually haven't really set up our collisions. So you can see there, or you could maybe see that it's actually still colliding with the base. So let's just come to our base and we can right click and we can just add in simulation tags a collider tag. So now as my keys, they inflate and they move and they become simulated, they're going to kind of like bounce around and they're going to collide with the keyboard base. So now let's play this again. Okay, so we're getting a little bit closer. We're getting a little bit closer. But now what we want to do is we want them to give the effect of them floating away. So we could see then they were coming up a little bit, but they weren't actually floating. What was happening is as they were inflating and colliding with the base, that force was forcing them upwards. But we actually want them to continue to float away. So the way that we do that, and you're probably going to think this is a little bit strange here, considering we turned gravity off, but I'm actually going to re-add gravity under the Simulate Forces menu. So if we go to gravity, what this is going to do, it's going to re-add our default gravity in. But the thing is, if I leave it as it is, if I leave it as default gravity will kick in. And so what that means is everything will fall again. Our keys will begin to fall to the floor. So what we want to do is we want to actually reverse this. So if I just hit a negative or a minus sign in here, so we've now reversed this gravity acceleration setting. Everything is now, it's going to be a little bit crazy, but we'll leave it as it is just to show you what happens. As I press play and it kicks in, everything flies away. And I mean, it looks kind of funny, but it's not really what we want. We're not really getting that nice, light, floaty feel. So how do we do that? Well, it's actually just because this value is just way, way too big. And so if I set this value to something like, I don't know, let's go maybe like minus 30, we should then get a slightly softer float happening. Okay, maybe even lower. Let's go 15. And then one more thing I do like to do, and this will be something that I probably show in every single one of these settings, or these setups, sorry, is in the Simulate menu. If you ever want to add just some fun variation, just throw in a turbulence force. What it's going to do, it's going to look at the strength and the scale values. Think of the scale as like a 3D noise that's being applied over the top. And then your strength is how strong this turbulence effect is going to be. So let's maybe just add, I don't know, a scale of 10% and then increase this. So now we can see we're getting this sort of wild turbulence effect going on. And we could even reduce that down to maybe something like 3. And then back in my gravity, maybe again, we just go minus 10. Because we don't want anything too crazy. We want it to be like light and fun and just a nice floating going on. And so this is how to create that type of inflation effect. So because I want to show you some of the other techniques, what I will say is one quick tip for this, and what I actually ended up doing on that final shot, is a lot of this is actually based on the vertex map. So if I wanted to make this more interesting, I would come into my vertex map, and instead of just using a linear field, which is fine, it's a nice, really quick and easy way of doing a growth, is we could actually set up a vertex map growth using the freeze modifier layer, and then we can apply something like a random field. And what that would do is, as then my vertex weight grows at different areas and it grows across different keys, we will then get a different type of inflating and floating effect. So some of the keys, if they remain red, so a value of 0, they will stay still and static and they won't be simulated. So we can create a really more interesting looking result. And what I'll do is when I share this project file, which I will do, I will set up a slightly different vertex map growth and I will share that with you all. So let me just have a quick look through some of the questions based on this. So again, if you have any questions, then do let me know. So a quick one from James. Is it best to make the redshift materials UV selections first before simulation? So this is sort of down to you. My workflow is I do all of this. I do everything that I would class as like the Cinema 4D stuff. For example, my selections, my simulation, my UVing. I do all of that before I even go to Redshift, before anything gets lit, before anything gets textured. And one, I do that because that's my natural thing that I do. And two, when you actually, I say this on a few of my streams, when it comes to working with Redshift, when you first change your renderer, so when we change our renderer to Redshift, what it's going to do is it's then going to apply, I think it's like 90% of the GPU power to Redshift, even if I'm not even using it. Even if I've just set it to Redshift, it's going to do that. And so that means it could potentially slow down my ability to simulate, and things could be a little bit slower because I'm now no longer having access to the entire GPU because it's already been allocated to Redshift. So do bear that in mind if you're working with Redshift and simulating. So yeah, I do my C4D stuff first, then my Redshift stuff. So we have a quick question. How would we approach this if we still needed gravity for other sims in the scene? Well, what we could do is we have something called a simulation scene. And in our simulation scene in here, we're able to add elements and forces. The elements are the particular like simulation object. So balloon, cloth, rope, and then our forces would be the forces that you want to affect that particular part of your simulation. So we could have different simulation scenes for different objects and simulated things in our scene. So hopefully that helps with that. What is the logic to change the scene scale for simulations? Well, Cinema 4D has its default set of settings and parameters, which is based on the default object's sizing. For example, when we throw in a cube, it's 200 by 200 by 200. When we add a cloner, the distance between the grid is 200 by 200 by 200, things like that. And a lot of things in Cinema 4D have this default sizing. And so what that means is when it comes to simulating, it's presuming that objects are based on that default sizing. And if they're not, and in a lot of cases, if we're making things in the real world scale, we need to make sure we tell Cinema 4D that this scene scale is now a lot smaller, or vice versa, could be a lot bigger. You could be having huge buildings, and therefore you have to go the opposite way around. So that is why we need to do that. And just quickly on Vitas's question, does it have to be precise? In my opinion, no. I think we can just do, as long as we make it a rough sizing to the scale, then we should be good to go. So in this case, it was 30 centimeters, but I changed it to 10 centimeters. A few more questions coming in. Is it possible to do mixed, rigid, soft body simulations using the new simulation scene? So at the moment, what I call the new simulation settings do not include rigid body. So if we right click in our bullet tags, we can see we have rigid body here. Whereas in the simulation tags, this is everything that has been moved over to the new system. There are a few tricks to get around this, which I actually showed in my waffle setup. So what you can do is you can work with really low resolution objects and use those as a, what did I do? My brain isn't working today. So you can use those to then, oh no, sorry. You can use those to 222. Why can I not see it? So what you can do, I don't know why my head isn't working properly today. Oh, here we go. Sorry, mesh. You can use a mesh deformer. God, my head is not working. You can use a mesh deformer with a low res and a high res mesh, and you could simulate the low res mesh. And so the lower resolution your mesh, the more rigid it's going to be. So I mean, I could do a very, very quick explanation of this. If we take a cube, so we have one cube here and we have a second cube, Let me just take that down so everyone can see. And I go to NB. We have one cube that is going to be 3 by 3 by 3. And then let's go 12 by 12 by 12. Okay. So we can see we have a low poly versus high poly-ish version. If I add a collider to my plane, and then I add a cloth tag to these, I'm not going to change anything. You can see it's the exact same cloth tag, exact same default settings. And then I press play. You can see the low res version remains relatively rigid. And this is because of our topology or our segments, whereas the high resolution we can see works like this. So maybe you could do some tricks with low resolution versions of your mesh until we have access to rigid body. Okay, I'm just quickly flicking through a few more because I do want to get to the next one. Yes, so everyone's saying mesh to format. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that assistance there, everyone. I appreciate it. Okay, cool. So yeah, let me get to the next one. I don't think there are any other questions, but if there are, then feel free to let me know. And again, just throw in question at the beginning, just so I can see that nice and easily. Okay, so we don't need this anymore. And yeah, let's just save that so I can share this one with you. And let's have a quick look at what we have next. Okay, so let's create this twisting cloth because this is a lot of fun. And we're going to do this with this basketball mesh. So this is going to be like our collider object. You can add anything to this, and we're just going to create that really fun cloth-like look using a variety of different forces. Again, this is going to be a super fast setup that just looks really fun and interesting to play with. So we have our basketball mesh here, or our collider object. I'm just going to right click and I'm going to add my collider tag to my basketball mesh straight away. And then we just need to create our cloth or our fabric. So again, let me just pull this slightly down because we don't want to have any collisions. And then let me just switch off my work plane. So let's set this to 800 by 800, and then let's do 100 by 100 segments. Okay. And then on our plane, which is our cloth, we can add our cloth tag. And again, back in our simulation settings, if we go to our scene, we just switch off gravity. And then what we can do, because if we press play, nothing really happens, we can begin to add and control my cloth using our forces. And we can pile these up, and we can do what we want to them. We can layer them on top of each other to create some fun and interesting looking effects. So if we go to simulate, we can go to forces. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an attractor. And an attractor is going to do kind of what it sounds like. It's going to attract our simulated object, which in our case, our cloth object, which is our plane. What I do need to do is a little tip here when you're using the attractor. What will happen is it will continue to try and pull everything together. And so it will continue to try and pull my cloth together. But the trouble is, once everything has got as close as it can get, if it continues to pull those points and that geometry together, we will get collisions and we'll get errors. And so we can solve that by just adding a spherical field, and then we can make it so everything inside the spherical field no longer gets attracted together. Therefore, we don't get any of those errors or any of those problems. So the way that we can do that is we grab a spherical field. Actually, first of all, we're going to just raise up the attractor, something like 120 centimeters. Then we're going to grab a spherical field. Let's make it a little bit smaller, maybe something like 60 centimeters. And the way that we can make it so everything inside doesn't get affected or attracted is we can invert this and we can increase that inner offset. And now what should happen is not a lot. And the reason is we actually need to just increase our attractor strength. So let's go 5, 5, 5. And then now as we pull it up, we can see that it's starting to pull that cloth up. Let's maybe increase our frames just so we have a little bit more time to play with. We can see that's now getting pulled in there towards our collider object, which is our basketball model. And then from here, we can start to pile up or layer up some more forces. So let's maybe add a rotation. And then we can also add a spherical field again, just inside of here. So everything inside the inner of this field is now going to be rotated. And let's maybe let's go 5, 5, 5 again. And what you will notice is straight away, as I press play, it's going to look a little bit strange. And the reason for that is it's animating or it's rotating currently around this x-axis. So if we just rotate that 90 degrees, what we then will have is we'll have our rotation sort of then happening around just like this. Okay, so now let's change a few things, because at the moment we've still just got our default cloth tag setting. So we don't really have a lot of bendiness and stretchiness. And this is how we can start to create more of that interesting and fabric-like or cloth-like feel. We can just increase our bendiness and we can increase our stretchiness. And again, we could maybe just reduce that thickness. And so now what we have is we sort of have this kind of effect going on, whereas it's wrapping all the way around it. And then again, nice way to add a little bit of extra variation is to just add some turbulence. And let's pull this in here and let's maybe just have a little look. So we can now see we get more of this cool turbulence effect happening around here. Cool. So you're probably thinking, oh, but it's looking a little bit low resolution. And I'd agree with you. And so the best and the quickest way to solve this problem is to just grab a subdivision surface and then drop your plane inside of it. And really, really quickly, let me just hide my spherical fields. Really quickly and really easily, we've created quite an interesting looking cloth sim in really like a matter of maybe 10, 15 minutes. And so it's still going to play okay with the subdivision surface, which shows how powerful the simulation settings are. But again, we can just switch that off if we want to adjust some of these different things. So another quick thing that we can do is this target length option. So what target length will do is, based on the value that we enter, is the cloth is going to increase in size based on that percentage value. And what I do like to do is I like to animate this on. So maybe we'll go to something like, I don't know, maybe like 30 frames, and we can go to 125% and set another keyframe. And so what you'll notice when I press play now is the simulation is going to kick in, but it's also going to increase the size of my cloth. And this can be quite fun because it can be used to add almost like extra material to your scene, extra geometry. As I press play, we can see that we get a lot more material, and it sort of just adds a slightly different effect to our cloth and to our fabric. Okay, so that was as kind of, as far as that scene got. It really is just a matter of adjusting some of your cloth tag settings. So the bendiness and the stretchiness is what's going to help sell this to be a nice fabric material. We can, or if we want to, we can add the target length to add some more, like what I say, add material, or just add some more geometry. And then we can layer up our forces to start to create some interesting looking results. And someone did ask earlier, I realized that I did miss one of the questions, which was about how would I go about caching this, or how would you go about baking it? And so what I like to do is I like to right click on the object that is being simulated. So in our case, the plane. And then what I do is I bake as an alembic. And then what will happen is we have that cache data as an alembic, which then gives us still quite a lot of control over a lot of the settings inside of it. And then we can disable all our simulation. And so this is actually going back to that same question, which was doing the redshift materials and lighting. What I like to do is I like to bake my simulations out. So once I'm done and let's say I was happy with this scene and I'm ready to now light and texture, I would bake this as an alembic, and then I would disable my simulation, and then I would then light and texture the alembic. That's what I like to do, only because then it gives me more like GPU power for the simulation while I'm doing it. And then it just means it's not having to calculate the sim whilst I'm then working with Redshift. So hopefully that helps. So Gabriel was wondering, what Mac am I using? So I flick between two different machines. So currently I'm streaming on a M1 Max MacBook Pro, but I do a lot of my rendering on a MSI Stealth 17, which has a 4080 RTX card on the inside and is very lovely. It's very powerful. But my streaming setup is on a Mac, which is why I'm currently using this. So hopefully that helps. Cool. So yeah, what have we got? So we've got about 15 minutes left. So let me have a quick look at the next one. So let's have a little look at creating this one, and then we'll do this one, because again, they're super fast and they're super fun. And that's the idea of today's whole stream, is to just do these really fun and fast simulations, nice and quick. Okay, cool. So again, any questions on anything, then just let me know. So we're going to start off with that top right one, which is, believe it or not, it is just a sphere and a couple of swept splines. That's it. And it's going to combine cloth and it's going to combine rope. So let me take my sphere and let's just increase our segments. So again, let's go MB just so we can see everything that's going on. And we're going to go to 128. The first thing I am going to do is, the sphere is the thing or the object that we're going to simulate, and we are going to look to inflate. And so again, sort of back to when we talked about the remeshing and everything needing to be even topology, when it comes to creating a sphere, we can see that we don't really get even topology. Everything sort of comes to a point at the top. And so what we do need to do is we actually need to just remesh the sphere so we don't have any issues or problems at these top and bottom points where all of our segments come together. So let me grab my remesh. Let's throw my sphere in my remesh. And it's done an okay job. But one of my favorite things about the remesh is not only that it gives me really nice topology, but we can actually adjust and enable symmetry on our different axes. And so because our sphere is perfectly symmetrical along all axes, we can actually just check these, and now we have perfect symmetrical topology. And again, connect objects and delete, and now we have our remeshed sphere. So let's just call this our bubble. And then NA. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to inflate this. We're going to use a balloon tag, and we're going to create some overpressure. So let's right click. Let's add a balloon tag. Let's maybe increase our stretchiness and our bendiness. So let's go 100 and 100. 100 and 100. And then let's increase our balloon overpressure. So I'm going to set a keyframe on my overpressure. Then at 30 frames, let's set that to 2. And as we can see, everything falls out of the sky. So let's go back. Command D gives us our project settings. Then under simulation and scene, this is where we can disable our gravity. So as you'll see, it's a lot of the same kind of style techniques. Is how we can create these nice, fun designs. So what I like to do is I like to disable gravity because I like to then play around with forces. I like to play around with collisions. I like to play around with vertex maps to control how I simulate things. So as we press play, we can see it's really not looking that interesting. All we're getting is a inflating sphere. You're probably thinking like, Ellie, come on, like step it up a little. And I'd agree with you. Yeah, it's not that interesting. So this is when we can start to think of, okay, cool, how can we make this a little bit more fun and interesting? So what we can do is we can combine cloth, so cloth simulation, cloth dynamics, with rope dynamics or rope simulation. And then we can use those ropes to almost constrict or restrict this bubble inflation really, really easily. So what I mean by that is, if I just grab a circle spline, maybe we just rotate this slightly and we make it a little bit smaller. So something like this. And then let's duplicate it. Let's have another one. And then we do something like that. And we make it a little bit bigger. So we don't have anything intersecting at the moment. We just have these two splines around the outside of our sphere bubble. And then what we can do, we can take both of these, we can right click, and then in our simulation tag, so where we find things like our cloth and our balloon tag, we also have a rope tag. And the rope tag you'll see is very, very similar settings to what we've just been looking at. So very similar to the cloth. We have bendiness, we have stretchiness, we have like friction, target length, all of those similar settings that work in the same way. And so what that means is because these then look at points, we need to make sure in our spline, we have enough subdivisions, just like we do when we remesh our topology. We need to make sure we do the same kind of thing with our splines. So let's just set this to 64. So we have more points on our spline, which will in turn control and affect our bendiness and stretchiness. And let's maybe just go, I don't know, let's go like 10. And then maybe, we don't really want much stretch though, do we? Okay, let's leave stretch like that. Because as my bubble inflates, I don't want the rope to kind of inflate with it, or not inflate, but stretch with it. I want it to maintain its sizing. And then our radius, this is where our radius is important, because the radius is going to be the collision surrounding my spline. So when I turn this into geometry, I need to make sure they're the same sizing. And so let's just play this. And so what we can see is we're now restricting that by using our splines, by using our rope simulation. And so let's just convert this into geometry. Let's turn these splines into some actual geometry. So let's take a sweep. And then what we want to do is want to put our circle inside of our sweep. And then when we use the sweep, we actually need a second spline, which is going to be swept along this. And to create something that looks a little bit like rope is we just need a circle. Let's maybe make it 2 centimeters. And we're going to drop that inside of here. So now we can see this is sort of what we have going on. We can press play. And we've sort of created this. Again, it's not looking super interesting, but our splines are holding in our inflation. And so then what we can do is we could then take advantage of that target length again. So we could increase our target length, maybe to something like 150. And then again, let's just reduce that thickness. And then let's see what happens as we press play. So now what we've done, we've used that target length to create more material, more geometry, more mesh. And then we've used the balloon or the inflating to still create some inflation or overpressure. And what we can see now, so we're now getting a little, we're getting some problems here. We're getting some errors. And the reason for that is, there's a couple of reasons. The first one, I think, is down to my geometry. So my rope is actually 2 centimeters in size, so in radius. However, in my rope tag, I've set my radius, so my thickness radius, only to 0.5 centimeters. So if I just set these to 2, this should fix this problem. Perfect, and it has done. So I've been able to fix those problems here. And again, just throw this into something simple like a subdivision surface. We've just created what went from just being a sphere inflating to something a little bit more interesting just by combining it with rope dynamics and some different ropes. And we're getting some collisions. That's cool. That's fine. So I want to show you, it's always great having errors and problems that come up. So as you notice there, we were getting some intersections happening. And so what we can do is back in Command D, simulation settings, we can increase things like substeps and collision passes. And this is how many times our sim is going to be calculated and our collisions are going to be calculated per frame. So what we can do, we can look to increase these values to start to fix and solve some of these errors. So maybe we can increase those again, just to make sure. So we're still getting some errors and some issues here. And this, again, we can just continue to increase these settings. Or what we can do is we maybe could just increase our thickness of everything. So we can come into our rope tag and we can increase our thickness radius here just to ensure that it's able to see those properly. And now we can see that we're not going to get any of those intersections happening. And this was how I created that top right shot. It was literally just combining a sphere with a cloth tag, and then we can use rope and we can use interesting like rope settings, convert that into geometry using a sweep to restrict some of that inflation going on. So there are so many different possibilities inside of Cinema 4D. So we've got a very, very short amount of time left. Again, let me know if you have any questions. But what I want to do, I want to fly through, and I mean fly through this final one, which is bottom right, which again was inspired by Flavio. Let me find. Yeah, so inside of here, I think, if we come to here, yep, here we go, this one. Let me just put that in there. So this one here, again, inspired by this incredible artist, Flavio. So I can show you how we can create this super fast. So let's throw that in there. Let's throw our basketball inside of here. And let's bring you all back. Okay, so let's just create our colliders. So we can do a cube. And I'm just going to do this, as I said, like super fast. Super fast and super quick. Let's make these 2 little collision blocks, something like that, and then something like that. So these are things that are going to come in and they're going to squish our basketball or whatever thing you want to squish. And then we go NB. And then again, we just want to make sure that we have enough subdivisions on here. And maybe let's go 12 by 12. And then something like that. That should be absolutely fine. And then we can add a little bevel or a little fillet to the edge of our cube as well. And so what we're going to do is just going to animate these cubes in. And then as this mesh, this basketball gets simulated, it's going to come in and it's going to smush everything together. So let's very quickly grab this cube. We're going to set some keyframes on the Z or the Z axis. So let's set a keyframe here for both of them. And then at frame 30, we're going to pull them both in. So let's say maybe like here. And then maybe this one is going to be like here. Set another keyframe. And so this is what we've created. Nice, simple animation. And now we want to create our same ballooning animation. So let me grab a balloon tag and let's maybe go 10 by 10 by 1. And then we can just add, as the same as we did before, a little bit of overpressure. So let's go maybe up to something like 2. And so what we have at the moment is gravity in our scene. So let's switch that off. And what we currently have is then just this inflating. But at the moment, these little blocks, the blocks that we animated, they aren't actually having an effect. They aren't being seen in our simulation. So we just need to right click and then add a collider. So now we can come in and it's just going to smush this together. It's going to smush our poor inflated basketball. And what else can we do? So we can come into our settings. We could increase this a little bit more. And we could increase that target length again. So if we wanted to, we could just say, oh, okay, on our target length, maybe we want that to be 125%. And so as that comes in, we can see we're getting that squished basketball where we switch on our subdivision surface. And it's just a little bit of a fun style, interesting simulation that we literally made in a very, very small amount of minutes. So that is the idea. That was the idea that I wanted to show you all, is how we can. So, for example, if you're new to Cinema 4D, or if you're new to simulations, or you're new to 3D in general, it can be quite daunting. You can think, oh, okay, what's something that I can do, like, what can I follow along with? What can be like fast, but also really fun and interesting? And I feel like simulations and these type of simulations are really just so beginner friendly. They're user friendly. They're so much fun. Like, I really enjoy just sitting and playing around on them. And then what I also love is it gives me a really cool base to then start working with Redshift. So I can think, okay, I can make my simulation really quickly, maybe 30 minutes, an hour. And then I have something really fun and really cool that I can then light and texture in Redshift. So yeah, that is kind of the idea of how we created these scenes here. Does anyone have any questions on this stuff? So I'm just kind of like flicking through here. And from what I can see, there isn't really any questions left. I don't think I've missed anything. But yeah, no. So also one final quick thing I do want to say is I'm actually going to be sharing these project files. So the things that we've just created now, these particular scenes, including the inflating keys. So for anyone who joined late, I know that I've just seen a message from Simo Studios about being late to class. That's totally fine, because this gets recorded and uploaded to the Maxon Trainer Team YouTube channel. So what you did miss was we created some inflating keys here. So if we just play this through, we created some inflating floating keys. We then looked at creating some twisted and fun cloth with forces. And then we created this really kind of like just strange abstract design. And then that final one, which was just that fun, inflating, squishy basketball, because why not? Because it's fun. So, we have a couple of quick questions. So from Vitus, do the UVs of the basketball get affected by the squishing? Yes. So as the basketball inflates and is squished, as you can imagine, the topology gets inflated and squished. So if I had some text on here, if I made my own texture and had some text on here, as this inflates and squishes, that texture is going to be deformed, but it will still match where it should match on the actual geometry. So it will be a correct type of deformation, if that makes sense. Let me have a quick one. Do you see? So I'm just going through. How would you do tearing a net? That is a good question. That is a good question, because in the cloth tag we have tearing. But I mean, if you're creating a net, you'd probably create it with rope. And is there tearing in rope? That is a good question. Let me just add a circle spline just to have a look. Tearing. Okay, so there is tearing. So that's interesting. Let me figure out how to do that, because we're slightly over the hour, but it would be adding a rope simulation to your net. And then what we can do is we can add tearing. And what tearing means is as our points get past a certain percentage, they will then tear and rip apart. So something like that I'm thinking of doing. But what I'll do, I'll find out an answer for that one, and who knows, maybe I could do it on another stream. And also thanks for the lovely comments from everyone. I'm really glad you enjoyed this stream. I definitely did. And yeah, if you ever have any kind of tips or techniques for future ones, then do feel free to let me know. What I'll do is I will, in the link to the YouTube channels on the Maxon training team and the Maxon pages, once I have the project files ready, I will add a Dropbox link to those. And as always, if you have any more questions for us, so maybe send the cloth tearing, or the net tearing one, into training@maxon.net. Feel free to put my name in the subject, and I will figure that out for you, and I will send you a project file. And that goes for anyone else. If you have any questions, or questions I maybe don't know the answer to or haven't got around to today, then feel free, training@maxon.net. And as always, I hope you all have a lovely rest of your Tuesday and a great week. I will see you, I'm sure, on another stream soon. But as you know, I will be doing these monthly, so I will definitely be having one at the end of September. Yes, I don't know what that'll be on yet, but hopefully some fun stuff. Again, anything you want to know, just let me know. Have a great week, everyone, and I will see you on a stream soon. Bye, everyone.